She opened the refrigerator door and screamed. She expected to find me starving in the dark. Instead, she found $50,000 worth of caviar and vintage champagne. My daughter stole my last check. She left me with nothing but a jar of old grits while she partied on the beach. She thought I was weak. She thought I would just sit there and wait for death. But she made a fatal mistake. She forgot who actually owned the antiques in the house. And she didn't know what I found hidden in her desk drawer. That one piece of paper changed everything. She wanted my inheritance. So I decided to eat it. Literally, this is how. I turned her greed into my absolute freedom. The front door had slammed shut 3 hours ago, but the heavy, sugary scent of Quintessa's perfume still hung in the hallway. That fragrance always seemed too intrusive to me. It's too loud. It did not belong in our old brownstone with its high ceilings. Here, the air was used to smelling like the dust of ages and dried lavender. It was a house of silence. And right now, that silence felt predatory. I stood in the middle of the kitchen. My eyes were fixed on the closed door of the pantry. The silence in the house was absolute ringing. I used to love this silence. It meant peace after a long day at the sewing machine. It meant rest when my eyes were tired from tiny stitches and my back ached from the endless stooping. But today, the silence was waiting for something. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. It is shameful to admit, but I was hungry. Just ordinary human hunger. The kind that gets persistent by evening. The kind that gnaws at your dignity. I walked over to the cabinet. The hinges creaked. They sounded like they were complaining about the disturbance. I opened the door. The shelves were impeccably clean and terrifyingly empty. Quintessa had packed in a rush. She had darted around the apartment like a bright tropical bird trapped in a cage. She tossed bikinis into her bag. She threw light sundresses and expensive tanning lotions into her suitcase. I remembered how she stopped in the doorway. She was already wearing her shoes. She held out her manicured hand. "Mama, give me your card just in case. What if the ATM down there doesn't work or something?" "But Quintessa," I tried to object. I felt a chill run down my spine even then. That is my whole Social Security check. What am I supposed to live on for 2 weeks? "Oh, don't start." She rolled her eyes. She snatched the plastic card from my trembling fingers. "You have a full jar of grits. Boil 'em up. Add a little butter. And it is beautiful. It will be good for you to detox. Doctors advise a diet for everyone at your age. Don't invent problems where there aren't any. I deserve this vacation." And then she left. She flew off to Miami, to the sun. 2 cocktails with little umbrellas. She took my money. She took my peace of mind. And as it turned out, she took my food with her grits, right? She mentioned grits. I reached for the top shelf where the old glass jar stood. It was labeled grits in my own handwriting some 20 years ago. The jar felt suspiciously light. I took off the lid. I looked inside. At the bottom, amid some grayish dust, lay a few lonely grains. There was not enough to feed a sparrow, let alone a grown woman. She had lied. Or maybe she just did not care. She had not even bothered to check if there was food before condemning me to this starvation diet. She just threw words out to silence my anxiety. She forgot about me the second she called her Uber. My chest went cold. It was not the kind of cold you get from a draft. It was ice. Ice that starts growing from the inside when you realize the truth. The person you carried, the person you nursed and raised, isn't just selfish. They are cruel. I closed the jar. I put it back. The sound of glass against wood rang out like a gunshot in the empty kitchen. I had to do something. Maybe some loose change. Quintessa often scattered coins. She would shake them out of her jeans pockets onto the floor. I headed to her room. Chaos reigned here. Clothes were strewn on chairs. Open tubes of lipstick lay on the vanity. Crumpled receipts littered the floor. It smelled of carelessness. I started methodically searching the surfaces. Under a stack of glossy magazines, nothing. In the jewelry dish, empty. My gaze fell on a crumpled piece of paper. It was carelessly thrown at the trash bin, but missing the mark. I bent down. My joints creaked in the silence. I picked it up. It was a printout of the hotel reservation and flight itinerary. I smoothed the sheet out on the tabletop. The letters danced before my eyes. But I saw the total figure immediately. It was bold, black, and merciless. The amount my daughter had spent on 2 weeks of beach relaxation was staggering. It was exactly equal to 3 months of my benefits. 3 months. I stood in the semi-darkness of her room. It felt like the walls were closing in. For years, I had darned my old stockings. I had turned coats inside out to remake them. Coats I had been wearing since before the turn of the century. I denied myself an extra peach at the market. I did this to buy her the best shoes for school. Then for college. Then just because she asked. Mama, this is what is in style now. That voice echoed in my head. I looked at the number on the paper again. She was drinking cocktails that cost more than my weekly medicine. She was sleeping in sheets that cost more than my winter heat. I walked out of her room. I pulled the door firmly shut behind me. I felt like I was cutting myself off from that smell of betrayal. I walked back into the living room. The room met me with silent grandeur. Here, in the light of the street lamps filtering through the heavy velvet curtains, stood them. My treasures. My jailers. The antique oak buffet, carved and heavy as a tombstone. Inside, behind the glass, the crystal and fine Haviland Limoges porcelain gleamed dully. A service for 12. We had eaten from it maybe twice in our lives. This is for Quintessa's wedding. I used to tell myself, the wedding never happened. But the china waited. On the dresser stood a silver tea service that had come down to me from my grandmother. Next to it, a jewelry box with pieces I never wore. Because where would an old woman like me go in this? Let it stay for the grandchildren. In the hall closet hung fur coats smelling of mothballs. Quintessa called them dust collectors. But they were worth a fortune. I looked around my living room. This was not a home. It was a museum. The Quintessa Johnson Museum. And I was not the mistress of the house. I was the unpaid curator. A curator who shuffles around in worn-out slippers. A curator who wipes dust off the exhibits. A curator who starves to death so that one day a visitor can come and take everything, without even saying thank you. My stomach growled treacherously again. But now something else was mixed with the sound. Anger? No. Anger is a hot feeling. This was clarity. Icy, crystal clear clarity. I walked over to the coffee table. A stack of old newspapers lay there. Quintessa always scolded me for not throwing them out. Junk, trash. She would snort. But I knew that in the classified section there was something I needed. I had seen the ad a week ago. I circled it in pencil just because. Out of habit. Never admitting the thought that I might need it. I sorted through the papers. My hands were steady now. There it was. The City Chronicle, the page with private ads. The red pencil circle was barely visible in the dim light. But I knew what it said. Mr. Alistair Sterling. I buy antiques, porcelain, silver, rarities. Honest appraisal. House calls. I looked at the telephone. The old rotary dial gleamed in the twilight. Reliable grits, you say? I whispered into the void. I picked up the receiver. The dial tone was long and steady. It sounded like a lifeline. I started turning the dial, but my hand stopped. I let the receiver rest on my shoulder. I needed to look at them one last time. Not with the eyes of a mother, but with the eyes of a stranger. The living room was drowning in shadows. The heavy velvet curtains blocked out the streetlights. They turned the room into a dark cavern. I breathed in. The air did not smell like dinner cooking. It did not smell like family. It smelled of lemon oil polish and old wax. It smelled of stagnation. It smelled of a life put on pause. My gaze traveled to the antique oak buffet. It loomed in the corner, massive, dark, carved with lions and grapevines. It looked less like furniture and more like a tombstone, inside, behind the glass that I polished every Tuesday. The crystal goblets stood in rigid rows. They were soldiers. guarding a history that no longer existed. The fine Haviland Limoges porcelain gleamed dully. A service for 12. White china with delicate gold rims. My mother had given it to me. Her mother had given it to her. We had eaten from it maybe twice in 40 years. Once for my husband's funeral, and once when Quintessa graduated high school. Other than that, they were forbidden. I remembered Quintessa's voice from a month ago. She had slapped my hand away when I reached for a crystal glass to drink water. Mama, don't. You will break it. That is for my wedding registry. Don't use the good stuff. Use the plastic cup. I looked at the silver tea service on the dresser. It was tarnished slightly at the edges. It demanded constant care, constant attention, just like Quintessa. I looked at the Persian rug under my feet, threadbare in spots but still majestic. I walked around it to avoid stepping on the delicate patterns. I lived in the margins of my own house. I tiptoed around the furniture. I ate in the kitchen to avoid crumbing on the table. I sat on the hard wooden chair because the velvet armchair was too nice to sit in. And suddenly, the truth hit me. It was a physical blow. It hit me harder than the hunger pangs in my empty stomach. This was not a home. This was a museum. The Quintessa Johnson Museum of Future Inheritance. And I was not the mistress of this house. I was the unpaid curator. I was the janitor. I was the night watchman. I shuffled around in worn-out slippers with holes in the toes. I wiped dust off exhibits I was not allowed to touch. I denied myself heat in the winter to keep the humidity low for the wood. I starved myself to save money for polish and repairs. And for what? So that one day, a visitor would come. A visitor named Quintessa. And she would take everything. She would take the crystal, the silver, the rugs. She would take it all without even saying thank you. She would walk over my grave to get to the buffet. My stomach growled. It was a loud, angry sound in the silent room. It was the sound of reality breaking through the illusion. I was standing in a room worth $50,000, surrounded by assets, surrounded by luxury, and I did not have a single dollar to buy a loaf of bread. I was a millionaire beggar. It was absurd. It was a joke. And the punchline was my life. I looked at the empty spot where the grits jar should be. Quintessa had left me to die. She had taken the cash meant for my survival. And she expected me to sit here, quietly guarding her treasures until I withered away. She valued these spoons more than she valued my life. She valued this rug more than my comfort. She valued the dead things more than the living mother. Something snapped inside my chest. It was a sharp, clean break. The chain of guilt I had worn for 20 years shattered. The fear of using the good things evaporated. Why was I saving this? For a daughter who told me to eat water and cornmeal. For a daughter who was currently laughing in a 5-star hotel restaurant, ordering steak while I looked for crumbs. No, the museum was closing. The curator was resigning. Tonight, the liquidation begins. I lifted the receiver back to my ear. The dial tone was still there, steady, waiting. I looked at the number I had circled in red. Mr. Alistair Sterling, Antiques, Silver Rarities. I started turning the dial. Every digit took effort. It felt like I was cracking a safe. But it was not a safe I was breaking into. It was my own freedom I was unlocking. 1, 2, 3. The rotary dial clicked back into place with a satisfying sound. It rang once, twice. Hello, a male voice answered. It was slightly raspy but polite, professional. Listening, I took a deep breath. I filled my lungs with the air that smelled of old wax and betrayal. Good evening. My voice sounded unexpectedly firm. It did not sound like the voice of a starving old woman. It sounded like the voice of an owner. Is this Mr. Sterling? My name is Yulie. Do you buy sterling silver flatware? I do. Interest appeared in his voice, immediate and sharp. What period are we talking about? I looked at the velvet case on the sideboard. I looked at the buffet that held my prison bars. Yes, early 20th century. I said Gorham Chantilly pattern. Full service for 12. Silence on the other end. Heavy silence. He knew what that was worth. I want to sell it. I said, tomorrow. Mr. Sterling turned out to be punctual. The night had passed in a blur. I had not slept. I sat in the armchair opposite the buffet, like a sentry guarding the treasures one last time. But I was not guarding them for her anymore. I was guarding them for me. They were no longer heirlooms. They were hostages. And I was about to exchange them for my life. At exactly 9 in the morning, the doorbell sliced through the silence. It made me flinch. But I did not retreat. I stood up. My knees popped. I smoothed down my old house dress. I walked to the door. I unlocked the deadbolt. On the threshold stood a man of about 60. He wore a neat gray overcoat, wire-rimmed glasses. He looked intellectual, distinguished, but his eyes were keen, observant. They were the eyes of a predator who knew the value of everything he saw. "Mrs. Yulee?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "I am Alistair. We spoke yesterday." "Come in," I said. "Don't take off your shoes." I stepped back, letting the wolf into the sheepfold. But for the first time, I was not the sheep. He walked into the living room. I saw his gaze slide over the walls. He scanned the room like a barcode reader. The heavy furniture, the paintings, the dark corners. He had expected to see another desperate grandmother with cheap trinkets. He expected silver-plated knickknacks. He expected a hope to get at least a penny. But when he saw the furnishings, his eyebrows rose ever so slightly. He stopped in the center of the room. "You have an interesting home," he noted cautiously. There was respect in his voice now. I looked at the buffet. I looked at the silence that had trapped me for decades. "This isn't a home," I replied dryly. "It is a storage facility, and I am clearing out the inventory." I walked to the sideboard. My hands were steady. I took out the heavy case lined with worn velvet. The latch clicked loudly, like a gunshot. I threw back the lid. On the dark green lining lay 12 silver spoons. They were massive. Intricate engraving covered the handles. The monograms of my great-grandparents intertwined with grapevines. Quintessa adored them. She often took out this set. She would stroke the cold metal with her fingers. "When I get married, Mama, we will eat cake with these on our anniversary." This was her dowry, a dowry she hadn't even bothered to take with her. She left it here to burn through my money instead. Mr. Sterling put on white cotton gloves. He took a lute from his pocket. He leaned over the table. Silence hung in the room, broken only by his breathing, and the soft clink of metal against metal. "Gorham," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Early production. The condition is marvelous. These have hardly been used." "Never," I corrected him. "They were never used. They were only admired." He straightened up. He took off his glasses. He looked at me with new interest. "Usually in these cases people accept the scrap price. But that would be sacrilege. I can offer you—" He named a sum. The number hung in the air. It was impressive. It equaled 5 of my monthly checks. 5 months of life, lying on the table in the form of cold metal spoons. But as I looked at him, I realized something else. I wasn't just a museum curator anymore. I was a merchant. And merchants do not accept the first offer. The sum he named hung in the air between us. It was impressive. It equaled 5 of my monthly Social Security checks, 5 months of heating bills, 5 months of medicine, 5 months of keeping the lights on in this mausoleum. A month ago, I would have fainted from happiness. I would have grabbed that money with trembling hands. I would have hidden it under the mattress for a rainy day. I would have thanked him profusely for saving me. But today, something different woke up inside me. It was not gratitude. It was not relief. It was a cold and calculating recognition. I looked at the silver spoons gleaming on the velvet. I looked at Mr. Sterling's polished shoes. I remembered the years I spent at fabric markets. I remembered haggling for every inch of silk for my clients. I remembered fighting to save them a dime while they never tipped me a penny. Those instincts suddenly flooded back. They were not gone. They were just dormant, waiting for a moment of survival. No, I said firmly. The word was quiet, but it landed heavy in the room. Alistair blinked behind his wire-rimmed glasses. The polite smile on his face faltered for a fraction of a second. "Excuse me," he asked. His tone shifted. It was less gentle, more wary. I took a step closer to the table. I did not look at him. I looked at the silver. "This is Gorham." I repeated his own words back to him. Early period. I looked him straight in the eye. My gaze was steady, unblinking. A full set in the original case without a single scratch. The patina is perfect. The monograms are crisp. You will sell these to a collector for 3 times what you just offered me. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting him do the math in his head. I am not asking for the market price, Mr. Sterling. I know you have overheads. I know you need to make a profit. I am asking for a fair dealer's price. I named my figure. It was 40% higher than his offer. It was a bold number. A number that commanded respect. Silence filled the room again. It was thick, heavy, dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the window. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. But on the outside, I remained a statue. I saw the gears turning in his head. He looked at the spoons. He looked at me. He saw the worn cuffs of my dress. He saw the shadows under my eyes. But he also saw this set of my jaw. He realized that before him stood not a desperate old lady begging for scraps, but a business partner who knew the value of her inventory. He chuckled softly. Wrinkles gathered at the corners of his eyes. The predator recognized the prey had teeth. "You, Mrs. Yulee, are not as simple as you seem," he said with a nod of acknowledgement. "Life teaches you." I parried instantly. "And hunger is an excellent teacher." He paused for another second. He was weighing whether to haggle further. He looked at the silver again. He knew he would still make a fortune on it, even at my price. "All right," he said finally. "We have a deal." He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was dry and cool. Mine was warm and firm. "Deal." He opened his leather briefcase. The smell of expensive leather and crisp paper drifted out. He took out a checkbook. "Cash," I said. I did not want a paper trail. I did not want to wait for the bank to clear it. I wanted the weight of my decision in my hands right now. He hesitated, then nodded. He reached into an inner pocket of his coat. He pulled out a thick envelope. He started counting out the bills. 100, 200. The rhythmic snap of the banknotes was the sweetest sound I had heard in years. It sounded better than Mozart. It sounded better than Quintessa's laughter. He placed the stack on the table. I did not grab it. I picked it up slowly. I counted it myself, bill by bill. Under his watchful eye, it was correct. To the dollar. 10 minutes later, he left. He took the heavy velvet case with him. The front door clicked shut, and I remained standing in the middle of the living room. Clutching a thick stack of bills in my hand, my heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. Boom, boom, boom. It was not fear. It was adrenaline. Pure, intoxicating energy. It rushed through my veins like fire. I had just sold Quintessa's dowry. I had sold the spoons she dreamed of eating her wedding cake with. I had sold a piece of family history. And I waited for the guilt to come. I waited for the shame to crush me. But it did not come. I felt the weight that had pressed on my shoulders for years become just a little lighter. The room felt bigger. The air felt easier to breathe. I looked at the empty space on the sideboard. It did not look empty to me. It looked liberated. I didn't hide the money under the mattress. I didn't put it in the cookie jar. I put it directly into my purse. I walked to the hall closet. I pushed aside the everyday coats. I reached for the back. I pulled out my best coat, beige cashmere, soft as butter. I had kept it for special occasions, for weddings, for funerals, for days that never came because I was too busy being a shadow. Today was a special occasion. I put it on. It settled on my shoulders like armor. I buttoned it up. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was pale, but her eyes were burning with a new light. I walked out of the house. The autumn air was crisp. It bit at my cheeks. My legs carried me on their own. But they did not turn left toward the discount supermarket. They did not turn toward the store with yellow price tags and wilted cabbage. They turned right. I was walking downtown. I was walking to the Epicurean market. I hadn't been there in 15 years. I used to walk past it quickly, lowering my head, afraid to even look at the window displays. The prices there bit so hard it was scary. A single peach cost as much as a bag of potatoes at my usual store. But today, I wasn't planning to look at the window displays. I was planning to own them. The heavy glass doors swung open before me, automatic, silent. And I was washed over by a wave of scents. Fresh baking. Rich dark coffee. Expensive spices from corners of the world I would never visit. I stepped onto the polished tile floor. I clutched my purse tighter. Not out of fear, but out of anticipation. I walked past the shelves like a queen returning from exile. I didn't look at the potatoes. I didn't look for discounts on pasta. I didn't check the expiration dates on the clearance rack. I went straight to the deli counter. The glass case was a jewelry box of meat and cheese. Legs of cured ham hung from the ceiling. Wheels of cheese the size of car tires sat on wooden boards. A clerk in a crisp white apron looked up. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked politely. I looked at the price tag on the prosciutto di Parma, $30 a pound. I looked at the Virginia ham, honey-glazed golden. I looked at the clerk. I smiled, and for the first time in years, it was a real smile. "Weigh me out half a pound of the prosciutto, please," I said, "and some of that ham, and don't slice it thin. I want to taste it." This was just the beginning. I turned my cart toward the cheese section, and I knew exactly what I was looking for. Then came the cheese section. It was a cathedral of dairy. The air smelled of earth and salt. It smelled of caves and craftsmanship. I took a wedge of aged Parmesan. It was hard as stone. It was pale yellow and speckled with crystals of salt. It smelled of nuttiness and history. Next to it lay a soft brie. It was infused with black truffles. The smell was intoxicating, earthy, rich. It promised to melt on the tongue like butter. I grabbed a jar of olives. They were stuffed with almonds, large, green, glossy in their brine. I did not check the price tag. I did not look for the generic brand. I simply put it in my basket. I walked to the bakery section. The scent of yeast and warm flour enveloped me. I bought a fresh baguette. It was still warm from the oven. I could feel the heat radiating through the paper bag. The crust was rough against my fingertips. It was golden brown and dusted with flour. It promised a satisfying crunch. And then I saw them, peaches, huge, velvety, filled with sunshine. They were lying on a woven tray like royalty. They were out of season, of course, imported from a land where the sun never stopped shining. They cost as much as an airplane wing. But I did not care. "Two," I said to the clerk. "Give me the two most beautiful ones." He picked them up gently, as if they were Fabergé eggs. He weighed them. He placed them in a separate bag so they would not bruise. And finally, the seafood section. Cold smoked salmon. Thin slices. They were translucent in the bright light. The color of a perfect sunset. Silky, oily, rich with omega-3 and dignity. I walked out of the market with 2 paper bags. They were not heavy physically, but they held more life than all my stocks of grits over the last 10 years. They held the weight of my self-respect. I walked home. My heels clicked on the pavement. I did not hurry. I was not rushing home to hide. I was parading home to feast out at home. I did not eat in the kitchen. I did not eat on the oiled tablecloth that smelled of bleach and sadness. I went into the living room. I walked to the sideboard. I took out a snow-white tablecloth with handmade lace. It was starch stiff. It had been folded for years. Quintessa forbade me to use it. "You will stain it, Mama. That is for guests. That is for people who matter. Today I'm the guest." I said aloud to the empty room, "Today I matter." I spread the tablecloth. It settled on the dark wood like a cloud. I smoothed out the creases with my hand. I took out the best plate from that very service. Thin porcelain with a gold rim. It clinked softly on the table. I laid out a silver fork. I still had forks. Knives and dessert spoons were also plentiful. I had only sold the teaspoons. But I did not need a spoon for this meal. I laid out my purchases. It was a ritual. I rolled the slices of ham into rosettes, pink and tender. I cut the cheese into perfect cubes. Sharp angles of Parmesan against the soft curves of the brie. Olives, salmon, warm bread that I broke with my hands, cracking the crust. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Crumbs fell right onto the lace. I did not brush them away. I looked at them. Golden crumbs on white lace. It looked like art. It looked like life being lived. And the peach. I placed it in the center of the plate. It glowed. I sat down. I pulled the heavy chair up to the table. I picked up the peach. I bit into it. Sweet juice splashed onto my lips. It ran down my chin, sticky, warm, alive. The taste was incredible. It was explosive. It was not just the taste of food. It was the taste of freedom. It was the taste of the fact that I exist, that I am important, that my body, my stomach, my desires, they all matter. I ate slowly. I savored every bite. I let the truffle cheese melt on my tongue, coating my mouth with luxury. I let the salt of the ham mix with the sweetness of the peach. I washed it all down with black tea from a ceremonial cup. The steam rose up and caressed my face. I looked at the blank wall where the calendar hung. I realized something profound. All these years I had been saving things for a future that might never come. I lived in expectation that someone would appreciate my sacrifice. But sacrifices are not appreciated. They are used. They are consumed just like this food. But unlike this food, they leave you empty. When I finished, only crumbs remained on the plate. And the peach pit. I felt a fullness I hadn't experienced in a very long time. A calm, dignified fullness. It started in my stomach and spread to my soul. I stood up. I walked to the sideboard. The place where the spoon case had stood gaped with emptiness. The dust there was slightly lighter. It outlined a rectangle of absence. I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the long receipt from the gourmet market. I carefully smoothed it out. The paper was crisp. I placed it right in the center of that light rectangle, in place of the family's silver. On the receipt, amidst the list of delicacies, the word total was printed in large bold letters. It was a large number, a shocking number, but it was worth every cent. I smiled at my reflection in the glass of the sideboard. Dinner, I whispered. It was just dinner. The week flew by like one long sunny day. I woke up not to an alarm clock, but when the sun touched my pillow. I had croissants with butter for breakfast, not empty oatmeal. And so, as I sat in the armchair with a glass of rich red wine, a Cabernet from 2015, advised by the sommelier at the wine boutique, the phone rang. The ring was harsh, demanding it cut through my peace like a knife. I knew who it was without even picking up. Only one person knew how to call with such entitlement. Only one person could make a telephone ring sound like an accusation. I looked at the wine in my glass. It swirled deep red, like blood. I reached for the receiver, but I did not set down my glass. My hand was steady. My voice was ready. "Hello," I said. And from the other end, the voice of my past life exploded into my ear. "Mama, are you still alive, Mama?" My daughter's voice burst into the silence of my living room. It shattered the peace I had carefully built over the last week. In the background of the call, the ocean roared. It was a loud, rhythmic crashing. Seagulls screamed in the distance. Upbeat electronic music thumped with a heavy bass. It sounded like a carnival. It sounded like paradise. And here I was, sitting in a room where the air was still and cool, holding a glass of wine that cost more than her plane ticket. "How are you doing there?" "Still alive." There was so much feigned concern in her voice. It was mixed with blatant superiority. It was the voice of a master checking on a neglected pet. The wine in my mouth suddenly tasted sharp, almost sour. I swallowed it slowly, letting the warmth burn away the chill of her tone. A live Quintessa, quite. I said softly, "I was thinking about you." She spoke loudly, shouting over the sound of the surf. "You are probably bored there alone. And hungry." She chuckled. A dry, cruel sound. "You boil that grits, Mama, but listen to me. Add more water. It makes it swell up. It is more filling that way. Old Grandma's recipe. Remember?" I took another sip of wine. The velvety taste returned, washing away the bitterness of her words. She was teaching me how to starve comfortably. She was giving me advice on how to trick my stomach with water, while she likely held a cocktail in her hand. "I am managing," I answered calmly. My voice was steady. It did not tremble with gratitude. It did not shake with hunger. "Don't worry about me. Oh, come on. Don't put on a brave face." She laughed again. "I know you have got nothing to eat there, but it is okay. It is a detox. Hold on for another week. By the way, I saw a fridge magnet for you. It is shaped like a dolphin. I will bring it to you." A magnet. She was bringing me a piece of plastic worth $2. While spending my entire pension on ocean views? She continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "If, of course, you don't run up the electric bill while I am gone. Because I know you, Mama. You will forget to turn off the light in the bathroom, and I will have to pay for it later. Do not turn on the TV. Read a book by the window until it gets dark. Electricity is expensive." She spoke to me like an unreasonable child, like a burden that needed to be controlled, even from 1,000 miles away. She was micromanaging my poverty. She wanted to make sure I was suffering correctly economically before, in my past life, I would have started making excuses. I would have stammered, "No, no, baby, I am saving. I am sitting in the dark. I am being good." I just smiled at my reflection in the dark window. I saw a woman in a cashmere coat, holding crystal. "I am finding resources Quintessa didn't even suspect existed." I uttered into the receiver. I looked at the wine bottle on the table. It stood tall and dark, a silent sentinel of my rebellion. "So don't worry about the lights, resources," she snorted. And there was so much smugness in that sound. "What are you talking about?" Found some change in the sofa cushions, or went to Miss Theodosia for salt again. "Look, Mama, don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors. Don't go around with your hand out. It makes me look bad. Dot. All right. I got to go. We have a pool party starting now. Don't get bored there with your porridge." Click. She hung up. She didn't wait for a goodbye. She didn't say, "I love you." She just cut the connection, confident in her complete, undivided power over me. In her picture of the world, I was sitting right now in a dark kitchen, choking on plain, watery porridge, counting the days until her return, so I could gratefully accept a plastic dolphin and a new portion of reproaches. She thought she had broken me. She thought the hunger training was successful. She thought I was a dog waiting by the door. I slowly lowered the phone. I placed it back on the cradle. I finished the wine in one long swallow, feeling the warmth spread through my body. It reached my fingertips. It reached my toes. "Pool party," I repeated into the silence. "Well, I have my own plans too." I picked up the notebook lying next to the phone. On the open page, a time was already written down. Tomorrow, 11 o'clock sharp. Alistair S. I had originally planned to sell the wardrobe, that huge oak closet in the hallway. It took up half the passage. It always snagged my sleeves with its carved corners. It was antique, expensive, but I hated it. It was a dark spot that absorbed light. But after this conversation, after hearing her laugh about water in my grits, I changed my mind. The wardrobe was too impersonal. It was just furniture. Selling it would be practical, but I didn't want practical anymore. I wanted vengeance. I wanted to sell something that would hurt, something elegant, something that would hit her just as painfully as her words about the electricity bill. I stood up. My movements were fluid, decisive. I went to the dresser in the bedroom. I opened the top drawer. It slid out smoothly. There, in the back, lay another jewelry box, smaller than the first. I opened it. On a velvet cushion lay a brooch. It was an antique gold piece, shaped like a twig with delicate leaves, studded with small diamonds, and a large dark ruby in the center. This ruby burned. It looked like a drop of thick blood. It looked like the heart of a dragon. Quintessa adored this brooch. She never asked for permission to wear it. She just took it. She would pin it to her blazer when she went on a date or to an office party. "Mama, it is vintage. It is all the rage right now," she would say, dismissing me. She considered this thing hers, just like the apartment, just like the furniture, just like me. I took the brooch in my hands. The stone was cold against my skin, but it quickly warmed up in my palm. I remembered how Quintessa once lost the clasp from it. She came home and tossed it on the table. She didn't even apologize. "Well, fix it. You are a seamstress," she tossed out then, as if I were her servant, and I fixed it. I spent hours finding the right wire. I polished it until it shone, so she could steal it again. I looked at the red stone. It seemed to wink at me. Tomorrow, Mr. Sterling would come to appraise the wardrobe. But he wouldn't leave with it. The wardrobe could stay for now. It could collect dust for another week. But this brooch, this symbol of her vanity, this was leaving. This was going to become lobster. This was going to become champagne. This was going to become the fuel for my new life. I closed my hand around the brooch. The sharp edges of the diamonds pressed into my skin. It was a good pain. It was the pain of waking up. I walked back to the kitchen. I placed the brooch on the table next to the empty wine glass. It sparkled under the electric light, the light I had left on deliberately. I walked to the bathroom. I turned on the light there too. I walked to the hallway. I flipped the switch. The chandelier blazed to life. I turned on every single light in the apartment. I let the meter spin. I let the electricity flow. I was not saving any more. I was burning the bridges. And the fire was beautiful. I went back to the living room and sat down. I looked at the brooch again. Tomorrow, Alistair would tell me what it was worth. But to me, it was already priceless, because it was the key to the next level of my freedom. But as I sat there, thinking about what else I could sell, my eyes drifted to the secretary desk in the corner. The bottom drawer was slightly open, stuffed with old papers. Quintessa used it as a dumping ground. I needed to find the certificate for the painting. Alistair had said papers increase the value. I walked over to the desk. I pulled the drawer open. I started sorting through the junk. Old receipts. Warranty cards for broken toasters. And then my fingers hit a thick plastic folder, shoved deep under a stack of magazines. The folder wasn't mine. It was bright red. A screaming color. I pulled it out into the light, and what I saw on the cover made my blood run cold. Inside lay several sheets stapled together. On top was a glossy brochure. Cheap paper, bad printing. Blurry photos of smiling old people playing checkers. Restful Meadow State Facility for veterans and seniors. The name seemed familiar. I had heard about it somewhere. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Then I remembered. Miss Theodosia, the neighbor. She told terrible things about this place. She said it smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage. She said the staff was rude. She said the old folks lay for days staring at the ceiling because no one cared about them. It was a state institution, the most budget-friendly one, with a bad reputation, a place where they send you to wait for the end, a place to be forgotten. My hands started to shake. The paper rustled loudly in the silent room. I set aside the brochure. I picked up the next document. It was a draft, a general power of attorney. In the header, my details. Yulie Johnson. In the agent field, Quintessa Johnson. And below, in fine print, a list of powers. Right to manage all property? right to sell real estate, right to represent interests in medical institutions. A date was penciled in the margins. Next month. Immediately after her return, the world tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table so I wouldn't fall. The mahogany dug into my palm. The air in the room suddenly became thick, viscous, hard to breathe. This wasn't just selfishness. This was a plan. A cold, calculated plan. She wasn't just waiting for me to die to get the inheritance. She was tired of waiting. She decided to check me in. Check me into Restful Meadows, like an old item to the scrapyard. She wanted to free up the apartment, sell the antiques, and live easy on my money. While I rotted in a government ward, she smiled at me. She took my card. She went to the sea at my expense, knowing that in a month she would kick me out of my own home, knowing she was sentencing me to death. Tears didn't flow. My eyes remained dry. Instead, a wave of such fury rose inside me that I thought I would scream. But I stayed silent. The fury forged itself into action. It hardened into steel. If before I sold things just to eat, just to pamper myself a little. Now this was war. This was survival. I threw the folder back into the drawer. But I didn't close it. Let it lie there as a reminder. Let it lie there as the evidence of her crime. I grabbed the phone. My movements were jerky, sharp. The ringing seemed infinitely long. It echoed the pounding of my heart. Mr. Sterling. My voice rang like a taut string. It was vibrating with tension. It is Yulie. Have you gone far? I am still in the neighborhood, Yulie. He responded with surprise. Did something happen? Did you find something else interesting? I gripped the receiver. My knuckles turned white. I found a reason. I cut him off. My voice was cold. Come back and bring a truck. A truck, he repeated. We are clearing everything out. Everything. Disbelief sounded in his voice. Mrs. Yulie, are you sure? That is a serious decision. Absolutely, I said. And I meant every letter of that word. I am selling the painting, the clock, the rug, and that service in the buffet. Everything that has value. Come immediately. The next 2 hours passed in a fog. Alistair arrived with 2 sturdy guys. They wore blue overalls. They smelled of sweat and sawdust. They silently and carefully carried my life out in pieces. The landscape with the river was taken off the wall. It left a light rectangle on the wallpaper, a ghost of what used to be there. The antique grandfather clock, whose chiming had measured time in this apartment for the last 50 years, fell silent. It was wrapped in bubble wrap. It looked like a mummy. The Persian rug, worn but still luxurious, was rolled into a heavy cylinder. Dust motes danced in the air where it used to lay. I stood and watched the room empty. I stood in the corner like a general watching a battlefield. With every item carried out, it became easier to breathe, as if they weren't carrying out furniture, but stones from my soul. The apartment was becoming spacious, light, and mine. No longer a museum, just a dwelling, just walls and a floor. Alistair wrote checks. He counted out cash. The sum grew. It was becoming obscenely huge for a pensioner. It was enough to start a new life, or end the old one in style. Are you sure you won't regret this? He asked quietly. The movers carried out the last box of porcelain. The china clinked softly inside. A final goodbye. I will regret only one thing, Alistair, I replied. I looked at the empty wall. I looked at the scratches on the floor where the buffet had stood. That I didn't do this sooner. When the door closed behind them, I was left alone in the echoing hallway. The acoustics had changed. My footsteps sounded loud, sharp. In my hands was a bag stuffed with money, a real fortune. I didn't delay. I didn't sit down to mourn the furniture. I had work to do. First, I called a cleaning company. I need a deep clean, washing windows, walls, floors, everything completely, so that not a speck of dust remains, so it smells of freshness, not old age. Can a crew come today? I will pay double. The dispatcher on the other end choked, but quickly agreed. Money speaks a language everyone understands. Then I opened the website of an elite gourmet boutique, the kind that delivers groceries to stars and moguls. I sat on a wooden stool in the kitchen, the only seat left. I scrolled through the catalog without looking at the prices. Black caviar, beluga, jars of 4 ounces, 8 ounces. Add to cart, truffles, white seasonal. Add to cart. Foie gras, whole duck liver. Add to cart. Vintage champagne, Dom Perignon. 2 bottles, 3. Add to cart. Exotic fruits, dragon fruit, mangosteen, papaya. Add to cart. Cheeses, cured meats. Handmade chocolate. I clicked and clicked. My finger hit the mouse button like a trigger. I watched the total rise. It exceeded the cost of my annual maintenance at that Restful Meadows nursing home. Good. Let it be expensive. Let it be wasteful. Delivery today. I told the operator. Confirming the order. As soon as possible by evening. The apartment shone. The windows were crystal clear. They let in the setting sun. It flooded the empty living room with golden light. It smelled of expensive cleaning products and lilies. I ordered a huge bouquet just because. For beauty. For life. The courier rang the doorbell. He wasn't alone. There were 2 of them, struggling to carry huge thermal boxes. We went into the kitchen. The refrigerator stood in the corner. An old, reliable Kelvinator. It hummed like a tractor. I threw open its door. Inside was empty and clean. Only a lonely bulb illuminated the white shelves. Load it up, I commanded. The couriers exchanged glances, but started working. Blue tin jars of caviar stood in neat rows on the top shelf. They gleamed like ammunition. Next to them lay blocks of golden butter and packages of truffles. The middle shelf filled with cheeses and meat delicacies. In the vegetable drawer, instead of the usual carrots and beets, bright alien fruits now showed off. Bottles of champagne lay on their sides. Taking up the special rack, the fridge was filling up. It was becoming heavy, dense, saturated. The shelves sagged barely noticeably under the weight of luxury. There was enough food here for a company of soldiers. If those soldiers ate exclusively delicacies. Anything else? The courier asked. Wiping sweat from his forehead, yes, I said. Try to squeeze that box of Belgian chocolates onto the door. When they finished, the fridge was packed to the gills. There wasn't room for even a matchbox. This wasn't a refrigerator. It was Alibaba's cave. Only edible. I paid, gave a generous tip, and closed the door behind them. I walked to the fridge. I grabbed the handle. I opened it. The light of the bulb reflected in the gold foil of the champagne and the glossy sides of the caviar jars. The cold air hit my face. It smelled not of soup and medicine, but of wealth. I stood and looked at this abundance. This was my answer. My shield, my sword. Quintessa wanted to send me to the scrap heap to get an inheritance. Well, the inheritance is now here, in this fridge, chilled and ready for consumption, but not by her. I closed the door. The click of the latch sounded like a verdict, but the silence was about to end. 2 weeks passed, and then came the sound of a key scratching in the lock. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. It was a sharp sound. It sliced through the heavy silence of the apartment. I didn't flinch. I was standing in the hallway. I was waiting. I opened the door. Alistair Sterling stood there. He looked professional, serious. Behind him stood 2 sturdy men in blue overalls. They smelled of sawdust and cold air. They looked like executioners. But they were here to execute furniture, not me. We began. Or rather, they began. And I watched. The first thing to go was the landscape painting. It hung over the sofa. A river scene from the late 19th century. It had hung there for as long as I could remember. Quintessa used to say it was boring. She said it was depressing. But she knew exactly what it was worth. One of the men reached up. His gloves were thick and rough. He lifted the heavy gold frame with ease. He took it down, and suddenly, the wall looked naked. A light rectangle remained on the wallpaper. It was a ghost, a pale outline of where the painting had protected the wall from the sun. I looked at that rectangle. It didn't look like loss. It looked like a clean slate. It looked like space. Asterisk. Next was the grandfather clock. It stood in the corner like a sentinel. It was mahogany, tall, imposing. Its chiming had measured time in this apartment for 50 years. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Every second of my life. Every second of my patience. Every second of my waiting. The men approached it carefully. They opened the glass door. They stopped the pendulum. The ticking stopped. The heartbeat of the house ceased. Silence rushed in to fill the void. It was a heavy silence, but it was not oppressive. It was peaceful. They wrapped the clock in bubble wrap, layer after layer, until it looked like a mummy, until it was just a shape. They tilted it back. They carried it out, and with it went the pressure of time. I was no longer counting the minutes until Quintessa returned. I was no longer counting the hours until the end. Time belonged to me now. Then came the rug, the Persian rug. It covered almost the entire floor of the living room. It was worn in places, threadbare where paths of travel had been worn over decades. But it was still luxurious, deep red and intricate blue. I watched them roll it up. They started from the edge near the window, rolling years of dust and memories into a heavy cylinder. The floor beneath it was pale parquetry. It hadn't seen the light of day since my husband brought that rug home. They hoisted the heavy roll onto their shoulders. They marched out. The sound of their boots on the bare wood was loud, sharp, echoing. The acoustics of the room were changing. The room was losing its softness. It was losing its ability to absorb sound. It was becoming hard, bright, echoing. Asterisk. I stood in the corner. My hands were clasped behind my back. I felt like a general watching a battlefield being cleared. Or perhaps I felt like a sculptor, chipping away the excess stone to reveal the true form underneath. With every item carried out, it became easier to breathe. My chest expanded. The air circulated freely. It didn't get trapped behind heavy velvet curtains anymore. It didn't stagnate in dark corners filled with knickknacks. They carried out the buffet, the heavy carved beast that had held the china. They groaned under its weight. It scraped against the doorframe as it left. A final protest. And then it was gone. The room was empty, spacious, light. Mine. It was no longer a museum. It was just a dwelling. Just walls. Just a floor. Just a ceiling. It was a container for me, not for things. Alistair walked over to me. He was holding a clipboard. He took a pen from his pocket. He wrote. The sound of the pen scratching on paper was crisp. He tore off the check. He handed it to me, or rather, he handed me the cash we had agreed upon. He counted it out, bill by bill, into my hand. The stack grew thick. It grew heavy. It was becoming obscenely huge for a pensioner. This was not just grocery money. This was freedom money. This was start-over money. Are you sure you won't regret this? He asked quietly. He looked around the bare room. It looked shocking to him. Like a skeleton. I looked at the empty wall. I looked at the scuff marks on the floor. I looked at the light dancing on the bare wood. I will regret only one thing, Alistair, I replied. My voice bounced off the empty walls. That I didn't do this sooner. When the door closed behind them, I was left alone. The hallway echoed. I walked to the center of the living room. I spun around slowly, my arms outstretched. I didn't hit anything. No furniture. No history. No obligations. But the job wasn't done. The house was empty, but it still smelled of the past. It smelled of old wax. It smelled of mothballs. It smelled of Mama Mouse. I needed to scrub her out of the floorboards. I picked up the phone. I sat on the floor because there were no chairs. I dialed a number I had found in the phone book. A professional cleaning service. I need a deep clean. I told the dispatcher, I want everything washed. Windows, walls, floors, baseboards. I want it to smell of freshness, not old age. Can a crew come today? I will pay double. The dispatcher choked, but he agreed. Money is a universal language. They arrived an hour later, a team of 3, armed with buckets, mops, and strong chemicals. They worked like whirlwinds. I watched the water in their buckets turn gray. That was the color of my past life, gray and murky. They scrubbed the windows until they were invisible. They polished the floor until it shone like a mirror. They washed the walls, removing the faint outlines of pictures, removing the fingerprints of time. By evening, the apartment was unrecognizable. The setting sun flooded the room. But now, without the heavy curtains blocking it, the light was blinding, golden. It poured in like liquid honey. The room smelled of lemon. It smelled of ammonia. It smelled of expensive lilies. I had ordered a huge bouquet, just for beauty. I placed it on the floor in the center of the room. It was the only thing there. A vase of white lilies in an ocean of empty space. I stood there, in the middle of my empty kingdom. The bag of money was heavy in my pocket. My stomach rumbled. But this time, it wasn't a rumble of desperation. It was a rumble of anticipation. The stage was set. The museum was closed. The exhibits were sold. The curator had resigned. Now it was time for the mistress to take over. I looked toward the kitchen. The old Kelvinator fridge hummed in the distance. It sounded lonely. It sounded empty. It was waiting. I walked toward it, my heels clicking rhythmically on the clean, bare floor. Click, clack, click. It was the sound of a countdown. I had the space. I had the money. Now I needed the ammunition. I sat on a wooden crate in the middle of the kitchen. It was the only seat left. I pulled my laptop onto my lap. The screen glowed in the twilight. It was the only light source in the room. I typed in the address, the website of the city's most exclusive gourmet boutique, the kind of place where prices were not listed, the kind of place that delivered to penthouses and private jets today. They were delivering to a brownstone in the old district. I started scrolling. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I did not look for discounts. I looked for vengeance. I looked for the most expensive, the most perishable, the most indulgent items known to man. Black caviar, beluga, the king of caviar. Jars of 4 ounces, 8 ounces. I clicked add to cart once, twice, 3 times. Truffles, white Alba, truffles, seasonal, rare. They cost more per ounce than gold. Add to cart. Foie gras. Whole duck liver marinated in Armagnac. Add to cart. Vintage champagne. Dom Perignon. 20 years old. Add to cart. Exotic fruits. Dragon fruit with its pink scales. Mangosteen with its purple armor. Papaya filled with orange sunset. Add to cart cheeses, aged Gouda, Roquefort, cured meats imported from Spain, handmade Belgian chocolates filled with champagne ganache. I clicked and clicked. My finger hit the mouse button like a trigger. Click, click, click. I watched the total rise. It climbed past 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. It exceeded the cost of my annual maintenance at that Restful Meadows nursing home. It exceeded the price of my dignity. Good. Let it be expensive. Let it be wasteful. Let it be glorious. Delivery today. I told the operator on the phone. I want it within the hour. I will pay for the rush. The courier rang the doorbell 40 minutes later. He wasn't alone. There were 2 of them. They were struggling. They carried huge white thermal boxes. They were sweating. We went into the kitchen. The refrigerator stood in the corner. It was an old, reliable Kelvinator. It hummed like a tractor. Its white enamel was chipped in places. It looked like a relic of a poorer time. I threw open its door. The inside was empty, clean, scrubbed of all memories of leftover soup and wilted lettuce. Only a lonely bulb illuminated the white wire shelves. It flickered slightly. Load it up, I commanded. The couriers exchanged glances. They looked at the empty kitchen. They looked at the woman in the cashmere coat standing on a bare floor. But they didn't ask questions. They started unpacking. The first box opened. A cloud of cold vapor escaped. Blue tin jars of caviar. They stacked them in neat rows on the top shelf. They gleamed like ammunition, cold, metallic, deadly. Next to them, they placed blocks of golden butter from Normandy and small packages of truffles wrapped in wax paper. The middle shelf filled with cheeses, wheels of blue, wedges of yellow, logs of white goat cheese dusted with ash. The meat delicacies followed: prosciutto Jamin Iberico, salami with truffle oil, in the vegetable drawer, instead of the usual carrots and beets. The bright alien fruits tumbled in. They looked like jewels, pink, yellow, green. Bottles of champagne lay on their sides. Taking up the special rack, the gold foil on their necks caught the light. They looked like soldiers lying in wait. The fridge was filling up. It was becoming heavy, dense, saturated. The wire shelves sagged barely noticeably under the weight of luxury. There was enough food here for a company of soldiers. If those soldiers ate exclusively delicacies, anything else? The courier asked. He wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. He looked at the mountain of boxes still on the floor. Yes, I said. Try to squeeze that box of Belgian chocolates onto the door, right next to the butter. When they finished, the fridge was packed to the gills. There wasn't room for even a matchbox. This wasn't a refrigerator anymore. It was Alibaba's cave. Only edible. It was a vault. And I held the combination. I paid them. I gave a generous tip. A tip that would have covered my grocery bill for a month in the old days. They left. I closed the door behind them. The lock clicked. I walked back to the fridge. I grabbed the handle. The metal was cool. I opened it. The light of the bulb flared up. It reflected in the gold foil. It reflected in the glossy sides of the caviar jars. The cold air hit my face. It smelled divine. It didn't smell of soup. It didn't smell of medicine. It didn't smell of poverty. It smelled of wealth. It smelled of power. I stood and looked at this abundance. This was my answer. This was my shield. This was my sword. Quintessa wanted to send me to the scrap heap to get an inheritance. Well, the inheritance is now here. It is sitting on these shelves, chilled, preserved, ready for consumption. But not by her. I reached in. I touched a cold bottle of champagne. Condensation wet my fingertips. It felt real. I touched a jar of caviar. It felt solid. This wasn't a dream. This was a transaction. I had traded the past for the present. I had traded dust for taste. I closed the door. The seals sucked shut with a soft thud. It sounded like a verdict. I stepped back. I looked at the kitchen. It was stark. Bare, empty walls. Empty floor. But in the corner, humming quietly, stood a fortune. It was a trap. And the bait was inside. I walked to the window. I looked out at the street. Leaves were falling. Time was passing. The wait wasn't long now. 2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks of feasting alone in my empty palace. And then, exactly at noon on a Tuesday, it happened. A key scratched in the lock. It scraped against the metal. It turned. The tumblers clicked. The door swung open with a crash. It hit the wall. The noise of the street burst in. The smell of airplane fuel. The smell of hot asphalt. And then, her voice, "Mama, I am home." Quintessa's voice boomed like a victor's fanfare. "I hope you have humbled yourself enough to apologize for your behavior," she shouted from the hallway. "I am tired from the trip. I do not want to listen to your whining." The sound of heavy suitcase wheels dragging across the parquet. Floor followed. Rumble, rumble. She entered expecting the usual semi-darkness. She expected the smell of medicine. She expected my hunched figure rushing to meet her with slippers in hand. She expected to see her victim, broken, hungry, and guilty. But instead she was met by a smell. Not of mustiness, but of fresh lilies. A huge bouquet stood in a vase on the floor, and beneath that scent lay the subtle trail of my new perfume, sandalwood and jasmine. Quintessa froze on the threshold. I heard her sniffing the air, sniff, sniff. She was trying to understand what was happening. "What is that smell?" she asked suspiciously. "Did you spill air freshener or something?" She took a step forward. Suddenly, she stopped. The sound of her heels was too echoing. Click, clack, wait. A note of confusion slipped into her voice. "Why is it so spacious in here?" She looked around. Her gaze slid over the floor where the heavy Persian rug used to be. It was gone. The floor was bare and gleaming. She looked at the corner where grandfather's floor clock used to stand. Its ticking had driven her crazy in childhood. Now it was empty there. "Just a clean light-walled dot, Mama," she called out. "Quieter now." But she immediately shook her head, driving away this strange feeling of wrongness. "Okay, we will figure out later where you shoved everything again. I am hungry as a wolf. They fed us some garbage on the plane." She dropped her designer purse right on the floor. Thud, she marched decisively toward the kitchen. I didn't even turn around. I was sitting at the wooden table. I took another sip of tea, real Darjeeling, tart and fragrant. I placed the cup on the saucer, clink. The sound was quiet, but distinct. Quintessa walked into the kitchen. She was tanned to redness. Her nose was peeling. She was wearing a bright sundress with a floral print. It looked alien in this strict, clean kitchen. "So, what do we have?" she asked aggressively. She didn't really greet me. "I bet you didn't cook anything except your porridge. I could eat a sandwich right now, even with butter. If yours hasn't gone rancid." She walked past me like I was furniture. I sat straight, squaring my shoulders in a new silk robe of emerald color. But she didn't notice the robe. She didn't notice my calmness. She was led by hunger and the habit of commanding. She walked up to the refrigerator. Her hand reached for the handle. Her fingernail polish was chipped. She had already taken a breath to start a tirade. She was ready to scream about what a bad hostess I was. She was ready to complain about how empty our fridge was. "Open it," I said quietly. Quintessa didn't hear. Or she didn't pay attention. She yanked the door toward herself with force, as if she wanted to rip it off. The door flew open. The light flared up, and Quintessa screamed. Ah, it wasn't a cry of pain. It was a yelp of pure animal terror. It was the sound of a brain failing to process reality. She recoiled, as if she saw a monster inside. Before her, tightly packed from bottom to top, lay her inheritance. At eye level towered neat stacks of blue tin jars. Black caviar, beluga, the most expensive, the rarest. There were many of them. Dozens of jars shining under the electric light. Lower down on the shelf where cabbage usually rotted, lay misted bottles of Dom Perignon. Labels with vintage years looked at her with silent reproach. Wheels of blue cheese wrapped in craft paper. Truffles looking like precious stones in special glass flasks. Bright pink sides of dragon fruit. Yellow mangoes. Purple mangosteen. A riot of colors this kitchen had never seen. On the door, instead of ketchup and mayonnaise, crowded boxes of Belgian chocolates and jars of foie gras. The fridge was bursting. It groaned with abundance. It was a feast during a plague. But the plague was the poverty I had banished. Quintessa stood with her hands pressed to her mouth. Her eyes were wide open. Shock splashed in them. She shifted her gaze from the caviar to the champagne, from the champagne to the truffles. Her brain refused to process the information. A poor pensioner who was supposed to be boiling grits in water could not have the refrigerator of an Arab sheik. "What?" she squeezed out. Her voice broke into a squeal. "What is this?" She reached out a trembling hand. She touched a cold jar of caviar, as if checking if it was real. The jar was real, icy, heavy. Quintessa turned to me. Her face went pale. The tan began to look like a dirty stain. "Mama, where from?" I slowly turned my head. I looked at her. There was no fear in my eyes. No love, only calm. I was hungry, Quintessa, I said simply, and you took my card. I had to improvise. Quintessa snatched a jar of caviar from the shelf, gripping it as if it were a grenade. Metal clinked against her rings. What does this mean? She shrieked, poking the jar in my direction. Where did you get the money for this? This is a fortune. Did you steal? Did you get a loan? Do you realize how much interest they will charge? She didn't wait for an answer. She darted around the kitchen. Her eyes darted feverishly. Suddenly, she froze. Her gaze darted to the hallway, toward the living room. It finally started to dawn on her what she had missed in the first minutes. The emptiness. She threw the jar on the table. It rolled with a crash, nearly knocking over my cup. She dashed into the room. I heard her stomping. Thump, thump. Then the sound of drawers opening. Slam, slam. Then her scream full of panic. Where is the jewelry box, Mama? She ran back out, holding the empty velvet case for the spoons. It was open like the mouth of a dead beast. The spoons. The silver. She was gasping for air. The ruby brooch. The clock. Mama, where is the clock? She looked around, seeing every missing thing now. Light spots on the wallpaper where paintings hung. The empty corner without the clock. The bare parquet without the rug. We have been robbed. She exhaled, her face twisted in horror. Lord, while I was gone, you let someone in. You forgot to lock the door. God, what a nightmare. We have to call the police immediately. She grabbed her phone. Her fingers trembled, trying to unlock the screen. No police, Quintessa. I said. My voice sounded quiet. But in this hysteria, it was like an icy shower. I put the cup on the saucer. Clink. A sharp, short sound that put a period to her panic. What do you mean, no need? She stared at me like I was crazy. Don't you understand? They took everything. Everything valuable. It is worth millions. Nobody stole anything. I looked her right in the eye. My gaze was heavy. Calm. I sold it. The phone fell from her hands. It hit the floor with a thud. Sold it, she repeated in a whisper. The word was unfamiliar to her. Alien to whom? Why, I told you. I was hungry. I stood up. I walked to the table where the jar of caviar lay. I picked it up, feeling the pleasant coolness. You took my check, Quintessa. Left me an empty grits jar. And a person needs to eat. So I decided. I paused, enjoying the moment. I decided to have your brooch for breakfast. You know, on toast with butter. It went down just wonderfully. And yesterday I drank grandfather's clock. Mahogany has an excellent aftertaste, it turns out. Especially if it is Chateau Margaux. It started to dawn on her. I saw the gears in her head grinding, connecting the facts. Empty walls. Full fridge. My calm appearance. Her face began to change. Horror gave way to anger. And then the realization of a monstrous loss. She looked at the jar in my hand. Not as food. She looked at it as liquid gold. As her apartment, car, comfortable life. Which I had just turned into an appetizer. You, she hissed, stepping toward me. You ate my inheritance. You ate through the antiques. Are you out of your mind? That was my money. Mine? I saved it. You saved it. I chuckled. You didn't even wipe the dust off it, Quintessa. You just waited for me to vacate the premises. You are crazy, she screamed. Senile old woman. How could you? It is a family heirloom. It is memory. Memory. I interrupted her. Memory of what? Of how we lived in poverty, sitting on chests of gold. No, daughter. They were just things, and they fulfilled their final purpose. They fed the mistress. Quintessa rushed to the refrigerator. She was shaking. I will save at least something, she shouted, grabbing everything she could from the shelves. This can be returned, sold back. I won't let you devour this. She grabbed 2 jars of caviar and a bottle of champagne, clutching them to her chest like rescued children. Give it back, she barked. Seeing that I wasn't moving, "'Tis mine. I will take it back to the store. Do you have the receipt?" I looked at her, at this grown woman acting like a greedy child, at her tanned face distorted by greed, and nothing remained in me but disgust. I walked right up to her. She backed away, pressing her back against the open fridge door. "Put it back." I said, "No," she squealed. "It is money. It is my money." Then I slapped my palm on the table. Bam! The sound was crisp, commanding. The cup jumped on the saucer. "Put it back." My voice became steel. I had never spoken to her in such a tone, even when she was little. "That is my dinner, and you have no money. Remember, you spent it all on the beach." Quintessa froze. She had never seen me like this. She was used to Mama Mouse. She was used to Mama Shadow. But now before her stood the mistress. She tried to object, but the grip of her fingers loosened. "You have no money, Quintessa," I repeated, enunciating every word. "You came to an empty apartment, to a mother who has no check. You wanted me to starve? Well, then, now we will starve together. Only I will be eating caviar, and you will watch, because this is my food bought with my money." Slowly, with an expression of the deepest suffering on her face, she put the jars on the table. The champagne clinked, glass against glass. "You will regret this," she whispered. Angry tears flashed in her eyes. "You will regret this. You are clearly not all there. A normal person wouldn't do this." She straightened up. A new frightening determination appeared on her face. "I am calling a doctor right now. You are dangerous to yourself and others. You are selling off property in a fit of madness. You need to be treated, and the transaction will be declared invalid." She turned. She ran out of the kitchen, picking up her phone from the floor on the go. "Hello, 911. I need an ambulance. Psychiatric help, urgent. My mother is having an acute psychotic episode." I stood and listened as she called the brigade. There was no fear in my heart. I took the jar of caviar she had just held. I calmly opened it. Pop. The lid released the pressure. The click sounded like a starter pistol before the final race. "Try it," I said quietly, scooping up black grains with a mother-of-pearl spoon. "Try to prove it." The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Quintessa was darting around the hallway like a wounded animal. She was grabbing the phone, running to the window. Finally, she exhaled. She rushed to open it. "Come in quickly." She is in the kitchen. She is completely inadequate. But on the threshold stood not orderlies in white coats. Standing there was Miss Theodosia, our upstairs neighbor. She was wearing her invariable floral house coat, and looming behind her back was Alistair Sterling. He had come to pick up the last box of books we had agreed upon this morning. Quintessa blinked. "Miss Theodosia, what is all this screaming?" the neighbor asked. "I thought there was a fire." And this gentleman rang too. "Miss Theodosia, you are a witness." Quintessa grabbed the neighbor by the arm. She dragged her into the apartment. "Mama has lost her mind. She sold everything. Everything clean out. Furniture, silver, paintings. She bought some food with that money and is sitting there eating. It is senile psychosis. I've read about it. She doesn't know what she is doing. I need confirmation to annul the deals. You saw she was always strange." Quintessa dragged the neighbor into the kitchen. I sat at the table, spreading butter on crisp toast. I was calm. I was wearing the same elegant emerald robe. My hair was neatly styled. I wore light makeup on my face, which I hadn't done in 10 years. Miss Theodosia froze in the doorway. She expected to see a mad old woman in rags scattering money, but saw a woman who looked better than she had in the last 20 years. "Yuli," the neighbor asked cautiously. "Quintessa says you are sick." "I am healthy, Theodosia." I smiled at her. I gestured for her to enter. "Would you like tea?" "Earl Grey and a sandwich with caviar." Real caviar. Theodosia's eyes widened when she saw the table. "With caviar," she repeated weakly. "She doesn't understand." Quintessa yelled, stomping her foot. Don't you see? She blew a fortune on delicacies. This is a clear sign of dementia. Loss of financial control. At that moment, Mr. Sterling entered the kitchen. He coughed delicately. Pardon me, ladies. The door was open. Quintessa pounced on him like a hawk. And you are a scammer. You took advantage of the helpless state of an elderly person. I will sue you. You will return all the things. My mother is incompetent. Mr. Sterling didn't even wince. He calmly placed his briefcase on a chair. He took out his glasses. He put them on. Incompetent, he repeated softly. Allow me to disagree. I have been in the antique business for 40 years. I have seen many sellers, and I can assure you, your mother is one of the most astute and tough negotiators I have met. He pulled a folder of documents from his briefcase. Here are the bills of sale for every item, signed by Mrs. Yulee personally. And note, attached to every contract is a certificate from a notary, attesting that the seller is of sound mind and memory. We arranged this specifically for seeing such family scenes. Quintessa snatched the papers. Her eyes raced across the lines. Seals, signatures, notary stamps. Everything was clean, legally flawless. But she gasped. But she is eating the money. That is not normal. And what is normal, Quintessa? Suddenly piped up Miss Theodosia. She was already sitting at the table, taking a bite of a $50 sandwich with appetite. Yulee saved on you her whole life. She wore the same coat for 10 years. And you? Did you ever buy her a chocolate bar? And now she sold her own things to eat like a human being. And suddenly she is crazy. You don't understand. Quintessa was on the verge of hysteria. Her plan was collapsing. Her arguments were crumbling to dust. That was my inheritance. She didn't have the right. She did, cut in Mr. Sterling, taking the folder back from her. It is her property, and she disposed of it as she saw fit. Silence hung in the kitchen. Quintessa stood in the middle of the room, red, sweaty, humiliated. Everyone was looking at her. Me with icy calm. Alistair with professional indifference. Theodosia judgingly chewing a sandwich. Quintessa realized she had lost the battle for the diagnosis. Calling doctors was pointless. The police even more so. Fine, she hissed, narrowing her eyes. Fine. You won this round. Mama ate everything. Good for you. But we still have to live. And when you run out of your delicacies, who will hand you a glass of water? Me. Don't count on it. I won't forgive you for this. I live here. And I will turn your life into hell. You will regret not dying of hunger. She turned to leave. To slam the door? She thought she had one last trump card left. Her presence. Her youth. Her ability to bully me in my own home. Stop, I said. I didn't raise my voice. But there was something in it that made her stop. I slowly pulled out the table drawer. The very one where I had moved the finds from her room. You are so worried about my future, Quintessa. About who will hand me a glass of water. About where I will live when I get really old. I took out the red brochure, Restful Meadow State Facility, and the draft of the power of attorney. Quintessa paled so abruptly. It was as if all the blood had been drained from her body. She recognized these papers. Where from? She whispered. I was looking for change, said, standing up. Remember, you told me to look for loose change? I found this instead. I threw the brochure on the table. It slid across this smooth surface. It stopped right in front of her. Smiling old people looked at her from cheap, glossy paper. You planned to check me in there in a month. I said it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. You wanted to sell the brownstone, take the money, and send me to die in a government ward smelling of bleach. Miss Theodosia gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Mr. Sterling frowned, looking at Quintessa with open disgust. Mama, that is not what you think. Quintessa began to babble, retreating toward the door. It is just in case. It is a good sanatorium. Shut up! I interrupted her. I know what kind of place that is. And I know what a power of attorney is. I walk right up to her. You were so worried about housing for the elderly. I took the brochure. I put it into her limp hand. Take it. Keep it for yourself. It will come in handy when you get old. What? She blinked uncomprehendingly. Because you won't live here anymore. I said quietly and firmly. Get out. You can't kick me out. She screeched, finding her voice. I am registered here. This is my home. This is my apartment, I said. And I changed the locks this morning. Your keys don't work anymore. And your things. I nodded at the suitcase that still stood in the hallway. Your things are already packed. You didn't even unpack. I will call the police. I will sue. Sue, I shrugged. But while the court is dealing with it, you have nowhere to live. And if you try to break down the door, Mr. Sterling is a witness that you threatened me with physical harm. And Theodosia, too. I looked at the neighbor. She nodded decisively. Setting aside the unfinished sandwich, I will confirm it, Yulie, and I will tell the beat cop she wanted to dump you in the poorhouse. Quintessa looked at the three of us, at the united wall against which her greed had smashed. She realized this was the end. She grabbed her suitcase. Damn you all, she shouted, breaking into a squeal. Choke on your caviar. I hope you die alone. She flew out of the apartment. The door slammed. Silence fell. Mr. Sterling coughed delicately. I should probably go, Mrs. Yulie. I will pick up the books tomorrow if you permit. Today it seems you need to rest. Thank you, Alistair. I nodded. Come tomorrow. When he left, and Miss Theodosia went to her place, finishing the sandwich on the go, I was left alone. I walked to the door. I locked the deadbolt. Click, click. The sound was final. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the door. My heart beat steadily. My hands didn't tremble. I returned to the kitchen. I picked up the jar of caviar Quintessa had tried to save. It was warm from her hands. I put it back in the fridge on the shelf next to the champagne. Cold is tastier, I said aloud. Ahead was the evening, and a whole life. My life. 2 weeks passed. The air in the apartment changed. It stopped being stale. It stopped being infused with fear and the dust of the past. Now a draft walked here, light, fresh, smelling of autumn and change. I stepped out onto the balcony, pushing the door with my hip. In my hands was a tray with a steaming cup of coffee, and a sandwich on a crispy baguette, with a thick layer of cream cheese and slices of red fish. On my shoulders lay a new wool shawl, soft terracotta color, warm as an embrace I had missed so much. I bought it with money from the sale of an old fur coat, the very Persian lamb one I had saved for 20 years, and which turned out to be eaten by moths. Funny to think. Moths ate my coat, and I ate empty porridge to save the coat for the moths. The circle closed, and I broke it. I sat in the wicker chair. Quintessa was gone. She disappeared from my life like a bad dream, leaving behind only silence. After that scene, she tried calling. She threatened. She cried. She knocked on the door. But I told her through the closed door just one phrase. One more call, Quintessa, and I sell the apartment. I will move to a small studio by the sea, and I will drink the money away, or donate it to a cat shelter. Decide for yourself. The threat worked. The apartment was the last bastion, the last hope for an inheritance. And she was afraid to lose that too. She went quiet. She dissolved into the big city, renting a room somewhere and hoping to learn to live on her own money. I looked back at the room through the balcony glass. It was almost empty. No bulky wardrobes. No dark corners. Just light space. And the few things I really liked. My favorite floor lamp. A comfortable armchair. Books. I was no longer the museum curator. I was the resident. The mistress. I picked up a glossy brochure from the table. Mountain Spring Spa Resort. Photos of snowy peaks, hot springs, and happy people wrapped in white robes. A month, I could afford a whole month there. The money from selling the silver spoons and that awful rug I hated burned a hole in my pocket, demanding to be turned into memories, not things. Into life, I brought the sandwich to my mouth. Fresh bread crunched, the salty taste of fish mixed with the sweetness of butter. I closed my eyes. I started chewing. The taste was familiar, strange, but I knew exactly what this taste was. It was the taste of those diamond earrings my husband gave me for my 30th birthday. They were heavy, pulling down my earlobes. I wore them only on holidays, afraid to lose them. I hated their cold heaviness. Now I was eating them, and they were delicious. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and hot, like the tears I didn't shed when I found the documents for the nursing home. I smiled broadly, sincerely, turning my face to the autumn sun. This was the taste of freedom, the taste of the fact that I owe nothing to anyone, the taste of the fact that my life belongs to me until the last breath, until the last penny, until the last crumb. I took another bite, and this bite was the most delicious in my life.